And just in case you guys want to start, we'll be starting off right now. So, hello everyone. My name is Idrus. I'm a senior at Syracuse University, and a member of the AF Initiative. The AF Initiative is a project at Syracuse University, a campus-wide project housed in the Department of African American Studies within the College of Arts and Sciences. Its focus is to promote Africa as an important set of knowledge by highlighting teaching, research, and publication work by Syracuse University scholars in arts, humanities, social, and natural sciences, mathematics, engineering, and others. We put on a lot of Black events, whether it be about knowledge, whether it be a lot of other speakers coming in. And today, this will be the first of many events that will be happening, a collaboration event. Today, we're joined by people from a lot of organizations, clubs, and people from a variety of campuses. This event will be the first of many where we have a shared space, so we discuss issues, history, and most important, liberation. In this event, we'll be talking about Black student mobilization, specifically historical and modern movements, how we should mobilize, and what we should be mobilizing for. We'll firstly start off with professors introducing themselves, and then they'll talk about their work, and I'll leave that to them. Then we'll go into a more student discussion, student-led and student moderator discussion, and professors will be supporting that discussion with their experience and their knowledge. We are joined by three incredibly educated and well-versed professors, Dr. Maliski, from Stony Brook University, Dr. Campbell, who brought two guests, Scott Brown and Ajay Tehimba, a Harlem educator, author, and community organizer, and Dr. Mixon Webster from Columbia University. Each of them have contributed a lot to their field. However, I'll give them their chance to speak on that. We'll start off with Dr. Maliski from Stony Brook University. And thank you guys all for coming. I very much appreciate it.
Okay. Greetings, everybody. My goodness, what a assemblage of individuals here. At least one of whom I know, or two of whom I know, one being the one who invited me, and then somebody else, but I'll come back to that. Greetings and just sending honorifics out there too. I'm at Stony Brook University, as was mentioned, in Africana Studies and history, tenured professor, and although not by much, a couple years now, and been teaching within the department for about 10 years. Did my PhD at UMass Amherst over there in Massachusetts with the rabble rousers of the Western Mass. And I'm originally from Boston. So I guess I just been moving from Boston westward and then southward and coming back to New York, where I actually have some family roots on both sides of my family. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. In thinking and knowing that there's not a whole lot of time, I want to just sort of try to jump into the topic as I understand it. And I want to thank Daquan Brooks, of course, who's my right hand. We're working together at Stony Brook. We've been blessed from some resources from upstate that ended up downstate, and making that connection, the New York connection, the New York State connection. Seeing folks from Syracuse and then Columbia, and then and also I gotta say hello to Scott Brown, who's a brother, a friend, a mentor, and just all around someone I've been kind of following for years, and without realizing in so many ways in the footsteps, as we often do in mentorship and in camaraderie, comradeship, and within Black studies and Africana studies. But I know about his upstate credentials and connections enough to get it. Now I get it. I'm starting to get it while you're on. Okay, and so on. I read his book. I read his book. The old stuff, the Kawaida stuff, and but anyway, thank you all for inviting me to this. And my understanding about this topic is that we are to really speak a little bit about mobilization, student mobilization, in terms of politics, in terms of campus involvement. Just hearing the back and forth at the beginning, that's I'm gonna take that as my kind of directional, because what I'm hearing there, what I hear is organizing, letting folks know what's going on, and creating networks. I think that so much of the time, we fall in love with the kind of how can I say, charismatic leadership. We all want to be Malcolm and or Martin and or Coretta or Rosa, and at least that's kind of how it was when I was coming up. And what I've learned, both as a student activist when I was a student, and then now as a professor, is that it really, there's going to be someone we all want to give that great speech. We want to be tap into the rich tradition of the word, which is a part of African American culture and tradition and organizing traditions. Being able to give the powerful speech and electrify the audience, and all that. A lot of people on here probably do that, but those are moments, the day to day, I think, of really pushing back against these powers that be, if we're really serious about what we're doing, and we lock in our analysis of what's going on, which I just gonna take as a article of faith that people on here are already doing that, and I add to that the array of data that comes out of Africana studies and Black studies as our evidence to back us up. Anyway, I jumped ahead, but when we do the day to day, those moments are more, they're not as glamorous, they're not as powerful all the time. It really is about the work, and it is about making sure, I think, communication networks are clear. What else is it about? Because the other thing I would also add is, and that's what I was kind of alluding to right there, is your analysis. I want to say especially to the students, trust your analysis. If you're, you all go to Columbia, if you got into Columbia, Syracuse, or these schools, you're brilliant enough to your work, it's good, but you're young. And I remember that when you're young, you're like, I can't be right about this. Are we right about this? We looked at the numbers and so on, but something's not, it's a confidence. So confidence is important. Trust your analysis, trust your training, trust the mentors and the mentorship that got you to where you are as young leaders in training and young sort of visionaries in terms of a new world yet to be born, where we could go with things, the possibilities. Okay. Trust your analysis. And once you do that, and move forward, realize that this process that is really ingrained in African American history, right? It's one that has been a liberatory one. It's not just for show. It is about making change. It's just my humble opinion here, 2 cents. Um, uh, and that's really critical. Trust your data, trust your instincts. Now, again, I teach in Africana studies. I know a lot of folks here are probably either in Africana studies, Black studies, whether in other home departments or disciplinary training. When we say that Black studies and Africana studies comes out of the 1960s and comes out of the movements, that's not just something to say. It that makes it different than your chemistry department, your history, that makes it different than the biology department. Nobody in biology had to sit in and take over a building to get their discipline. Like, we need a biology major on campus, that never, but with Black studies, Africana studies, that's the case. Power concedes nothing without a demand. in Frederick Douglass's immortal words. And we ought to grab onto that article of faith with both hands, because we want to be nice people. We're nice people, you know. We don't want to be arguing and yelling at people and stuff. But without the forcefulness and without the kind of seriousness, then we won't get what we need to get done. Now, understand that in doing that process, you also, because we got the revolutionaries. You know, you got your revolutionaries out there. They're like, you know, burn it all down. You know, now that's cool, but decide what kind of leader or what kind of reformer you are. You know, if you there's nothing wrong with working within the system, but we need equity, right? And we need parity and equity. And understand that when you invoke this powerful tradition of change that groups like SNCC, and who were the same age as most of yourselves, groups like today, with obviously Black Lives Matter and others, they're invoking this powerful change-making process. And when you do that, you also become part of it. You will become part of the system in a sense. You're saying to your university administrators or the powers that be, we've done our homework and research. We understand the power of change, and we want to understand better the functions of the neoliberal university as such, and we want to have a voice at the table to help craft a plan and a strategy. You know, notice that after the 60s, you know, most of the leadership, John Lewis, people in positions of mayor, governor, congressman, congresswoman, thinking of folks like, Horace Mann Bond and people, all they became part of the leadership, right? They were once the students who sort of like seemed like too radical, but then by doing so, by invoking that demand, society or powers that be recognized that and said, "Oh, you're one of us." Change happens generationally, and they became the new power elite. The Democratic Party right now is now headed by a Black man named Hakeem Jeffries. From we all know him from New York, and so change. That's how change happens. You will become part of it, and don't be ashamed of that or afraid of that. You keep your integrity in what you're doing. Now, I'm going to wrap it up here. What can keep you out of the breach, as it were? A lot of that, I believe, is in the data sets and understandings and work from Black studies and Africana studies. We, the whole of America ought to be calling us right now, knocking on our doors, because the biggest problems that America is facing have to do with race and have to do with policing of Black bodies and all this stuff that's going on. If they're truly looking for answers, people that are on here belonging to myself, we've been studying this stuff for years, doing it with accuracy, excellence, and integrity. And that's, I think, why Zaquan asked me to come, because he and I, he's taken my intro class, Africana Studies, and we go over this stuff. We use a great book by Anderson and other folks. Intro to African American Studies comes out of more folks from NCBS, Black Studies approach, but the information is good and it works. And so that's what we do. Draw upon that as you go forward. Remember that there are rules for radicals. That's a book too. And you can kind of get there by believing in yourself, believing in your vision, one that's based on preparation, study, mentorship, and the great tradition, the intergenerational tradition within African American culture of passing down the knowledge and information. That's how I came to this. A lot of people look at me and they're like, who is this guy? Zebulon Maletsky, but I come, have my mother's family's African American from Boston. And came down through that. Never went to school outside of Roxbury, Massachusetts until I went to college. And that just happens to be my journey. And lucky enough, ended up out at UMass and other folks to study with people who are deep in that soil of the Black culture and experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maletsky. That was a very great talk. I definitely gotta read Rules for Radicals. Seems like a great book, so appreciate that. And now we're gonna go on to Dr. Campbell. I know he brought two guests, so I'll let him introduce them. Again, thank you, Dr. Campbell, for coming, and I'll let you do what you gotta do.
Thank you so much, Idris, and thank you for your leadership, along with the leadership that is emerging from the Africa Initiative. I cannot name everyone from the Africa Initiative who is developing a new sense of responsibility and leadership in confronting the challenges of our time and this conjuncture. I think Zebulon has given us a good overview of what this discussion is about and the challenges for the present generation of students and student organization. I am a beneficiary, as all of you are, of the period 1965 to 1975 and the sacrifices that were made by those who had gone on before us. And those inside institutions of higher learning learned from those who were outside of institutions of higher learning. And in that generation, Malcolm X was a great inspiration for the students in the 1960s. And although Malcolm X never had a formal college education, he had the kind of education that was grounded in the experiences of the struggle for change and the humanization of our conditions. The conjuncture that brought about the 1960s is something that we have to bear in mind. In other words, our forebears who went before us had the kind of analysis that brought to bear the material conditions. What were the material conditions in 1965 in the economy of the United States? What were the ideas that they developed about self, about liberation, about society? What kind of organization and what kind of leadership they developed? So these questions, material conditions, ideas, organization, and leadership, are what we have to reflect on at this conjuncture, the period 2014 to 2024, the conjuncture of the Black Lives Matter movement, the conjuncture of Michael Brown and George Floyd, and creeping fascism and authoritarianism, how that is seeping into our society all around us. So I work in Syracuse University, and I work in the Department of African American Studies, and I work in the Department of Political Science, and I have the privilege of meeting and working with young students who are conscious about themselves and about what they can provide for the future. The posters that were passed out for today brought images of SNCC and Ella Baker. And every student should study Ella Baker and the self-organizing principles that she taught that were developed within the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. My task today is to introduce two persons who are at the front line of that period. One is my brother, the younger brother, Scott Brown, who teaches at UCLA, who was a beneficiary of the struggles in 1969 in Cornell. And the other is my brother, who was responsible for strengthening African American studies at Syracuse University. And his slave name at that time was Quentin Stiff. So even the African Initiative is very thankful for the work that they did. And so I want to stop here so that Scott can take it forward. I would recommend the book that Scott edited, Discourse on Africana Studies, James Turner on the Paradigms of Knowledge. I want to recommend this book so that I would want to see that Scott, who is now at UCLA and did his PhD at Cornell, is in this region, and we intend to have him in Africa Initiative in the spring. So I would hand over to Scott and for you to take a few minutes.
Sure, thank you so much, Professor Campbell. Just for total transparency, first of all, can everybody hear me? Am I coming through clearly? Okay, that's good to know. Professor Campbell is a legend, a living legend, in the sense that he's been a tireless advocate of Black and Pan-African, African world liberation for many years, to the extent, without betraying too many people's years, including my own, when I was a graduate student, his book on Bob Marley was required reading, and it still is required reading if you want to understand the connection between culture, resistance, and political organization. But I can't say enough without betraying the limitations of time about how important it is to have this great scholar with us who is, as you see, indefatigable. He's just always on the scene and can still outwork most of us. Let me say that I'm glad to also be able to hand off, and after the few minutes that I speak, to Brother Ajay Taimba, a Harlem educator, activist, and scholar, because he will tell the story that's very important of activism at Syracuse and how it led to the expansion of African American studies as a discipline on this SU campus, a story that I think we need to hear, and we also need to memorize as serious student activists in this area. Work grew out of studying with Dr. Turner, James Turner, one of the architects of Black studies. And what was distinctive about it was it had a Pan-African orientation. I studied Kiswahili and Mandinka in that program. We had people, Black folks from the African world represented there. At one point in the history, one of the folks that Professor Campbell has written about extensively, Dr. Walter Rodney, How Underdeveloped Africa. Dr. Walter Rodney, who was in exile, found a home in Africana studies at Cornell. So the idea of the discipline was that Black studies should be intellectual work that contributes to the liberation of African people in an unapologetic way. And why does that make it different? Because if you go, I remember I went to a talk on a medieval sword fight that this historian was saying was so important. And he was offended by the question, why is this important? So what does that mean epistemologically? We are not only not only not offended by the question, we start with an answer. It's in, no matter what we're looking at, even something I wrote on Black soldiers in the Philippines, and it was about really how Black soldiers act when pit against people of color. The struggle at Cornell University started and really picked up since the first Black students started coming there. But by the 1960s, it picked up to the extent that students who were influenced by the wider Black Power and civil rights movements started to bring organizations on campus. So they didn't see themselves just as students per se, they were also advocates for agitation in a wider context as well. They noticed the conditions in Ithaca, they organized around them, they formed Black student unions there. The Black Student Union was so powerful that when they were looking for a director for this thing that they wanted to build was a Black college. You know, they had the College of Arts and Sciences. They wanted a Black college. And Dr. Taimba can even attest to this. The compromise was the Africana Studies and Research Center. bigger than a department, answering to a provost, okay? Those are the structural kinds of things that we as proponents of the expansion of these institutions have to learn. Because we're a transitory group. We move, one generation graduates, new folks come in. We've got to make sure that there's a consistent flow of information for the next people to agitate for the expansion and strengthening of these institutions. Are y'all with me? Am I all right? I'm closing real quick. Now, let me say that when we came to Africana Studies in the 90s, there was lots of expansion going. And there was a sense that a baton was being passed. Every campus has different issues when it comes to building activism around making the campus the home that we would like to make it be with respect to being an ally of African liberation, at least those liberated zones in that space that we fortify and defend. Some places are just trying to get out of being a program. Some places are just trying to get a program. Some places are trying to get a master's degree. Some people are trying to get a PhD. So those issues vary. At Cornell, the students, what I'd like to end with, to show you how brilliant this is. The students were so empowered, as they are on the campus of Syracuse, that when they went to a conference in 1967 or 68 at Howard University called Toward a Black University. Those students were listening to agitators and activists who were talking about what this new Black studies phenomenon is. One of them was a graduate student from Northwestern named James Turner. He was an activist, brilliant mind. The student said, you know what? Instead of listening to this person tell us about Black studies, this is who we hire to be the director of our program. Not necessarily fitting all of the kinds of elite boxes that people use to narrow who can be there. They organized, and James Turner became the founder and director of Africana Studies and Research Center, a Pan-Africanist, a nationalist, and believer in self-determination, and brought those things into that program. So I won't say more about this, but to say the undergirding theme of what I wanted to share was a notion of student empowerment, knowing also what was achieved by those who came before you, so that we are not constantly reinventing the wheel, that we are strengthening and fortifying the institutions that we have. On that note, let me introduce a dynamic brother that you all should know this man's name. Look up, and I know this is his name before he Africanized his name, Quentin Stiff, but he was an African when he was Quentin Stiff, and he's a strong Pan-Africanist leader now, Ajay Taimba. If you look at the Syracuse newspapers, look at the back issues and look up Quentin Stiff, the name will come up and administration will be complaining about how this person was constantly at it, agitating for Black studies at Syracuse University. I'm gonna pass the baton to him so he can share with us some of the elements in the making of the Black student movement at Syracuse University.
When I heard that illustrious introduction, I was wondering who he was talking about. Brother Scott, I want to thank Dr. Brown. I want to thank the illustrious Dr. Campbell. His legacy, his reputation goes much farther than anything we can say about him. The work that he's put in for decades, we give thanks and honor to him, to them both. I want to start by saying thank you for allowing me a space to speak to you, some colleagues, some comrades, certainly some student activists. This type of intergenerational conversation and discourse is important and necessary. I want to start by saying that I am a culmination of where I was raised and when I was raised. I came up in Harlem. I still live in the neighborhood in which I was born in Harlem, Hamilton Heights, a block away from what they would call Sugar Hill. And at the time in the 80s, there was crack, there were gangs everywhere, violence, but there was also beautiful political hip hop. There was also the First World Alliance. I could walk 2 blocks and hear Dr. Jeffries in high school and hear people like Amos Wilson and hear people like Marimba Ani, who was then known as Donna Richards, some of our leading, Dr. John Henry Clark, some of our leading Pan-African nationalists, elder scholars. We had a slave theater in Brooklyn that I attended frequently. We had Liberation Bookstore owned by Sister Ona Mozak, rest in peace and power to her. I could go to this bookstore and she would sit me down. We would talk for hours while she's selling her merchandise. She's schooling me on Harlem politics, right? When I went off to Syracuse University and would send her our Black Voice newsletters, she would stay in touch, sometimes giving me free autographed books. I mean, so I kind of come from a place and a space and time that was very political. 125th Street, you could walk up and down, buy books, and you can learn about the history of Brother Malcolm from people who were maybe associates of his, people who were there at the time that he was alive and walking through Harlem. Great Garveyites were around. So I am the beneficiary of some really great teachers. And to the degree that I've done anything good, it's because I had good teachers. I really need to ground everything I say in that. Starting with my parents and family. My father teaching me of Nat Turner, people grinding glass and putting it in the white man's dinner and overthrows. He raised me to, I think, to wage war against white supremacy. And to him, I'm eternally grateful. So I want to give a quick story. Is everyone with me? I hope we're good. And I hope you can hear me and see me. If not, let me know. All right, so I came into Syracuse University in 1986. Keeping in mind, I'm listening to X-Clan, Poor Righteous Teachers, Public Enemy #1, KRS-One. This is what's going on at the time, right? We had our silly rap, we had some violent stuff, Cool G rap, but it was a really what people call the golden age. And so you could listen to the radio back then, and actually maybe 75% of it was semi-positive. 10% of it was outright revolutionary, right? It was a kind of a different time in that respect. And so I come up out of Harlem with all these older nationalists, Pan-Africanists kind of schooling me. I'm ready to go to work. First day on campus, this group called the Student African American Society is having a protest, right? And they have a fake coffin and they're marching and they're calling for, they're upset that the white radio station is firing all the Black student DJs. I got immediately interested in that, became a member, started writing for the Black Voice newspaper, became the editor of the Black Voice newspaper, eventually went to every SAS meeting. Sometimes I went too much to the SAS meetings, to the point where my grades were suffering if I can keep it 100 with everybody. Being young and maybe not able to balance certain things, I was a complete true believer. This was my opportunity to take my ideology I'd been learning all these years and to fuse it with action and activism and community organizing. So I was like a kid in a candy store at Syracuse University. I eventually became the president of the Student African American Society for 2 years. And I think that I like to ground things in the history before I go into what we did. We were the children, if you will, of a generation in the 60s. I come up in the 80s, but 20 years prior, our parents' generation set it off by absolutely waging war against white supremacy on these college campuses all over the country. And it's important that you know that they were primarily influenced by many people, but we have to really highlight Brother Malcolm, who was so powerful, so bad, that his ideas were catalyzed these students in his death. I want you to really think about that. About a year after he is ruthlessly assassinated, we see the Black Power movement, the Black Arts and Consciousness movement coming about. We know that it comes largely from Malcolm because these people who are leading these organizations are referring to themselves very clearly as the heirs of Malcolm. They're saying that in their documents, in their speeches. They are quoting, they are trying to actualize, operationalize many of the ideas that he constantly talked about. So in my parents' generation at Syracuse, they had took over buildings, had sit-ins, protests. They were protesting for a number of things, but primarily they wanted an education that was culturally relevant, historically relevant, and that was liberatory. that didn't just give them a nice degree, they can go work in the corporate world, and that was it, but that actually taught them about the plantation, about master's relationship to the plantation, about how we can overthrow the plantation. And the idea would be that we don't go to integrate into the country, because these were nationalists, right, coming out of Malcolm's ideology, but that we go to infiltrate the university, that we are in fact agents of our people going into this system of education to learn what we can, and then take that back to our communities to resurrect these communities, not so much to just escape the plantation, but to help in the tradition of a Harriet Tubman, to keep coming back and helping our kindred, our kith and kin to escape as well. Lastly, what would I say? So when we came to campus, we took over buildings for about a year and a half. We disrupted history, white history classes. We disrupted any important meeting they had. We had rallies, community town halls. We did sort of, you could say, built relationship with the larger Black community, which is often left out of these things on these college campuses. And we came up with 13 demands. One of them was a master's degree program and what we had then referred to as African American Studies, renovation of the community folk art gallery, renovation of Sims Hall, a new Martin Luther King library. And I am fortunate to say that because of all those people, myself and all of these students, working with all these Black professors, working with all of these Black staff members and community members, got all 13 demands agreed to. That doesn't mean they were all completely met yet, but they were all agreed to. I also want to say that SAS was pivotal in helping to establish an emergency blue light system on the campus. It was pivotal in helping to create alliances with the larger Black community, the Black community organizations, fraternal, the ones that dealt with business and employment, and the ones that dealt with civil rights, and with forcing the campus bus to stop wherever students needed it to stop, even if it was off the specific path late at night, and forcing the bus to operate until wee hours of the night, where at first it would stop at maybe 12 midnight. And I want to say lastly, that just as our parents' generation was motivated to such activism in the 60s by voices like Brother Malcolm, Marcus Garvey before him, many other soldiers, culture, politics, and organizations, our generation, their children, were motivated equally by culture, by the music, by the political organizations, the 5% Nation of Gods and Earths, to some degree Zulu Nation, the anti-apartheid movement, the Patrice Lumumba Coalition, I can go on and on. At that time, the Nation of Islam, which was a lot more radical, a little less conservative, I may say. And so we sprung from a movement that educated us and that schooled us, if you will. And I think if I would offer anything, I would just say, study these movements, study how there's a kind of this integration of culture, arts, and politics, and current events, and legislation, and important personalities, and how all of these factors kind of blend in to help shape movement and help inspire our future activists. And have an open mind. Try not to be locked in because Malcolm said it. Critique everyone. Ask yourself, Assata said it, then is that applicable right now? Or was that only applicable in a certain context? Don't be these type of demagogues and ideologues with these concrete minds. Be flexible, be thinkers. And with that said, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you. Peace.
Thank you so much. You three, it's incredible for the fact that, we live in your legacy. So much that you guys have done, we have the opportunity to live in. I think that's really incredible. And Professor Campbell, you already know the book I have right here, Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James. He very much inspired me to pick up this book right here. And, just living you guys, legacy is really incredible. And go on to that. We'll be starting out with, we'll be ending with the professor discussion before we go into the main discussion with Dr. Mixon Weber from Columbia University. So without further ado, I'll give it to him.
Thank you so much. What's up, everybody? I want to say thank you first, foremost, to my student Mazen, who invited me to this incredible event and initiative, and what I hope will be another kind of burgeoning network for us to kind of, to occupy and to do and produce some of this work that we care so much about, we're passionate about. I'm Dr. Jonah Mixon Webster. I was born and raised in Flint, Michigan, where I'm at right now. I'm a two-time college dropout. I've been to jail about 3 times. Let's see, I barely graduated high school. What else? Yeah, they got a case going on right now. But also, I am the Mellon Arts Postdoctoral Fellow at Columbia University in the Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies. Right now, I'm teaching a class on poetry from the Harlem Renaissance to the 21st century. One thing I want to kind of highlight is my main practice of writing poetry and how it has informed me in some of the organizational work that I've done or been a part of also. I've been writing poetry for probably about almost 20 years now. Started, from watching Def Poetry Jam and just seeing like how powerful, these performances and these words were. And I was able to experience how powerful they could be in the service of radical organizing. We might think of some periods like, the Black Arts Movement and how crucial it was, right, to some of the advancements that were made during that time in that period of Black civil rights and Black achievement. Recently, being from Flint, I pretty much was in a situation where I had no choice but to use my art as a way of intervening kind of in a protesting way, right, in a protesting manner against the Flint water crisis and its effects and aftermaths. I was working on my PhD at Illinois State University. I just left like months after the water switch had happened. I got arrested on a possession charge. I think they caught me with like 0.75 grams of weed on me. Because of that, I had what's called a court supervision with like a low-grade probation status. When the news broke about the Flint water crisis, everybody was telling me to stay at home. Don't come back. That kind of did 2 things. Number one, it kind of, really let me sit in and feel that tension when you feel like you're not active enough, right? You're not part of the movement enough, which I'm sure some of us might have felt at some point in time, right? Or that feeling is what has spurred us, right, into action or spurred us into the calling of organizing, right? Secondly, it forced me to write. It forced me to learn as much as I possibly could about what was going on back home. And since I, pretty much my mom told me like, do not come back. So, you gotta listen to what your mama said. So, I was literally forbode from coming back home, for protesting, from being part of the resistance that was going on here in Flint. So with that, I began writing this project called Based on Actual Events, Attempts to Survive the Apocalypse, which was a mix of like a hybrid form of writing. It was kind of like reportage mixed with lyrical poetry, mixed with text, sound, art, mixed with performance, mixed with straight up conceptual appropriation, where I included the frequently asked questions from the Flint water crisis that were issued from the state of Michigan and also the EPA. On top of that, I'm also the chapter leader for PEN America Detroit, which is an advocate for freedom of expression. And we also do programming work and organizing around issues such as banned books and also banned literature, which we know was a major problem, a major obstacle that had to be fought, right, in the organizing that was done in the service of Black studies and Black life and culture at the same time. We also do work around mass incarceration, where I also have produced work, art, poetry, sound projects, and performances that could kind of not just create awareness, which I think most people think that that's the only role of poetry or art making, is kind of create awareness, or actually, what it is a call to action, right? It incites, right, a spirit in you, right? It's a very spirited process, a very spirited material, right? That literally pushes you right into the center of what's happening. One of my other concerns as an organizer, having worked with such organizations like the Fundra Project, which was concerned with lead poisoning globally. We did some lobbying in DC, from press conferences to actually just knocking on legislators' doors within institutions of higher learning as a part of the Black Student Union at Illinois State University. And as the professional development chair, I fought to get the funding for us to be able to either go to conferences to get materials and books, and also to kind of create networks, right, amongst other university institutions, so we can kind of build like a little bit of a coalition. One of my main interests also is the intersections that occur in organizing for Black movements. And that runs the gamut from between gender and sexuality, how those kind of function within social movements, and how there are some certain tensions and obstacles that arise within camps, right? What I kind of refer to as like intra-racially, right? There's intra-racial tension or this intra-racial fighting that happens, or just literally violence that can occur within our organizations or within our groups. So issues from sexism to homophobia, I see how to tackle that as an organizer. Also, I'm very interested in involved in thinking about what are some of the techniques that we can use when it comes to producing poetry, art, or performance that can be in service of the organizational goals. And for me, that has to do with everything that we consider rhetoric or rhetorical, right? The rhetorical materials that we produce and the ones that we also challenge and critique. So I'm thinking about issues like straw man fallacies, ad hominems, tu quoques, thinking about ways to pretty much deconstruct, number one, how to recognize them, right? So from a training perspective, right, that happens within organizations, I'm very, very concerned with teaching or kind of sharing information that really can attend to the specific uses and deployments of language that goes in service to either oppressive goals and ends or to progressive or radical goals and ends, right? How to kind of deploy some of those things. One thing I kind of want to leave you with, as far as what I feel most passionate about, and as far as why I think this is a beautiful opportunity for some really good networking. In my book, Stereotype, I used the N-word 130 times. This was a form of conceptual and artful intervention in the use of this word as they might arise in our daily lives, and the art and the culture that we produce and that we consume, also within the institutions that we're going to. There was a white professor named Joe Scanlon who used my material to say the N-word in front of his class. Now the Black students at Princeton are organizing around him to try to get him sanctioned or fired. Of course, Princeton has completely stood by him during this whole entire thing, right? The students there at Princeton have reached out to me so we can try to begin finding ways to organize around this. They've done some really great work already. Though I've been told strictly, even like from my boss, don't engage, don't respond, don't get into it, right? There's kind of like no way that I can sit back and as someone who's like in the center of this thing that's going on at Princeton. And also, by the way, I should make mention that I do not have an Ivy League degree. I don't have, like I said, as a two-time dropout, I dropped out of community college. I went to Eastern Michigan University for my undergrad and for my grad degree. Illinois State for my PhD, right? So my kind of experience in these elite institutions are really kind of being concretized right now due to my experiences at Columbia and my experience was going on at Princeton. Even just recently, I was just doing a book tour where I was speaking at Harvard and Yale. And I can assure you that the same things and the same issues that you all might be considering thinking about right now as students are definitely going on with these other institutions. So we need to, number one, I think take this very seriously, that this is a great network right here to begin with. I want to make just kind of ask and see, right? Are we going to, or is there, you know, a plan to gather, you know, the contact information for everybody that's here? You know, like I'm like ready to start organizing now. This is a great time right now, you know, right, to do some of this organizing, right, and do some of this networking that will create an impact that will last long after we're all gone. Thank you.
Accent mixing up, that was a wonderful right there. And like the work you do, like on the, you know, on the and older subjects, you affected by it, and you take initiative to actually change that. That's very admirable. And now, you know, we're all these great minds speaking about it. I would love to open up the floor to have it be a student-led discussion, and with professors supporting us with our discussion as well. So I know there was a few questions I have asked, but I know Daquan, he had a question to start off. And this is open to everyone. I see Momodo has one. I'll go right to you right after Daquan. But I know there's a bunch of questions that I have asked. Like, there's a bunch of great people. I know you guys are all beautiful as well. So I can have some cameras turned on if you guys are comfortable and able for that. I'm really excited, like, you know, see what we hear, but I'll leave it out to Daquan to ask what he wanted to say.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, my name is Daquan Brooks. I'm studying Africana Studies here at Stony Brook University. And one of the questions, also just want to let everyone know that this is a student-led initiative, so I want everyone here to engage in a conversation. But the first question I will be asking is, what is the best way for Black students to mobilize? Whether this is looking towards like the institution as a form of transportation to get to place, or whether the institution to help out or contribute at all to the overall movement. What does it look like in your perspective? And that's how we started off.
And this is open to everyone, by the way. So, you know, like whether you're a student, a visitor, anything like that, the professors, anyone, feel free to talk about these points, talk about any experience you guys have had. Want to hear how you guys see mobilization. There's a few hands raised right now, but Momodou, do you have a question, or did you want to talk about the point that Daquan had?
Yeah, sorry, I have a question, so whenever I can ask that.
Okay, great. Mazen, do you have something to say about it?
Oh, me. No, I just wanted to follow up with another question after, but yeah, I'll leave the floor to someone else.
I'll jump in. I'll just jump in real quick, especially since as was mentioned, I'm gonna have to simply turn my video off. I'm gonna be with you all. There's no way I'm leaving this conversation because this is really rich. You know, very quickly, I have no doubt that there's a reason that we're all gathered here today. The people that are on this Zoom and who's here, and to that point of, you know, like me, I was always called to this stuff. I never knew why. I just always was like, people are like, why are you so into this African American history stuff? You know, Blacks. I don't really care about anything else. To be honest, you know, this is the thing that interests me the most, because it's the central, most difficult, most challenging question of our times. In this country, even though we tamp it down, race is on everyone's mind every minute. It always has been. And I tell my students, you know, even though Black studies is young, the studies of Blacks is old. They've been studying you and me and us for a very long time, studying on how to do what they needed to do, studying on how you and I will react, studying on how we relate to each other, you know. And it's real important right now at this time to maintain unity and not go for the okie dokes that divide us. We are literally right now, and I was just looking up brothers, Jonah Mixon Webster's website and stuff, information. I'm ashamed to say I was not familiar with the work, but I'm familiarizing myself right now. And, you know, keeping us caged, keeping us, you know, out of the workforce, out of the American economy, warehoused, you know, whether in the housing or in prisons or however. I love that when we was talking about hip hop. You know, hip hop was for I'm Gen X. I'll say I grew, 80s, 90s. When you know, we didn't have the same leadership that the previous generation had. They had that proud leadership. You knew who the leaders were. In our generation, I think due to the fact that the country, I would call it integration, really. All the different things that brought about, the different compromises, dilemmas. You had a lot of different kinds of leaders. And it didn't mean that they were bad, but they were struggling with the changes, right? But anyway, hip hop was like a leader for a lot of us. It really was. That the knowledge and information was transmitted through there. And it turns out now I know a lot of it was accurate, a lot of it was correct, a lot of it was right on point. Last thing, you know, like I remember when I was coming up, they did that album Self-Destruction, you know, Self-Destruction. People thought it was like kind of corny at the time. Oh, what's, you know, yeah, whatever. That was exactly what was happening in the 90s. We were doing the job of white supremacy ourselves to ourselves. We were carrying out all that in terms of, and didn't realize what we were up against. So the struggle is mighty, it's real. I don't know if I answered the question, but that's just something I was thinking about. You know, trust yourselves. There's a reason why you're drawn to this work. That's what I wanted to say. And you have something to say, to do.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Maliski. And Dr. Mixon-Webster, do you have something you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to say, as far as like, you know, this question of, you know, how should students mobilize, you know, what do students need to do to mobilize? I think what Dr. Maliski was, one of the things that really kind of surfaced to me, and I want to kind of, you know, reiterate or kind of double down on, you know, study, right? I think most of us, you know, especially all these legends, and, you know, everyone in their own right, who have been encouraging, you know, how important it is to, you know, to keep reading, right? Number one, you know, like when it comes to, you know, the material, it's going to be painful, it's going to hurt, right? There's going to be times that you're not going, you know, you have to maybe force yourself to read this stuff. It's going to be very, very long. You know, so you're talking about, you know, a century's worth of work and writing, right? That has gone to further situate and substantiate us as human beings on this planet, right? It's going to be intense stuff. Number one, and I'm going to say this in a very capacious way, meaning a very open-ended way, you know, but show up. Right, and to show up, you know, maybe not always. You probably can't do it physically, right? Definitely, if you can do it physically, show up. You want to look out for those movements, those waves, right, that are happening around you, right? See how you can get involved, right? Start there, you know, ask questions, see what it is that what strategies are in place. Number one of the things that when it comes to organizing, I had to really learn is that there's somebody, number one, that's probably already doing the work or interested or invest in doing the same work that you want to do, right? A lot of times there's no need to reinvent the wheel, right? You know, there's ways that you can kind of look out, search out, bond together, right? And show up in those spaces the same way you would want them to show up in your spaces, right? Also, again, like, you know, what I wanted to go back to in the story I told, you know, I couldn't come back to Flint, right? There are times when something might really be too dangerous for you, right, to actually be there, present, present tense. I remember when the protest in Birmingham, and we all went to that Confederate monument and we tore it down, you know, and everybody masked up. We got, hammers, stuff like that. We turned the stuff down. And next thing you know, fires breaking out, right? Cops is called, stuff like that, stuff like that. Some of that might be maybe not your call, right? Or some of those very direct things, might not be exactly what appeals to you. But you can also show up in the work that you produce, and the work that you share, right? When you show up and you share the information that you're gathering, you share, number one, the knowledge of what's happening, what's going on, and you remain faithful to doing so. That's another way of showing up. You don't always have to be on the ground to be on the ground, if that makes sense, right? Everything is a network, right? It's like roots, literally underground. You can work on underground, you can work on the ground. There's little ways that you can show up, and I think that's one of the things I want to make sure I want to drive in is just find those ways that look productive for you in terms of showing up for the concerns that you have and the issues that you care about.
Yeah, thank you so much. And also, feel free to also reply to any points that may be made, like before any questions are asked. And also, if I do call on you, feel free to say your name and just who you're representing. So yeah, do you want to reply to the question that was originally asked, or do you have another question?
Oh, yeah, I actually wanted to reply to the question that was originally asked. Firstly, I want to introduce myself. My name is Yaya Diawara. I attend Syracuse University, and I'm a senior here studying economics. Firstly, I want to thank Bruce for setting this up, because he actually has been speaking about it a lot on campus and giving this opportunity to speak to a lot of people, and I appreciate that. And in terms of answering this question, what I wanted to talk about is people like Bruce are the people that I feel like we need in setting up spaces like this. And I feel like, on a serious note, as like Black people, we need to become together and create these spaces for us, because especially like for people like us, I'm not sure about if everyone here goes to a PWI, but we go to a PWI and we don't have these spaces that often talk about Black mobilization. In fact, people are kind of separated. However, when these spaces are made, like a lot of things are talked about, and I feel like it's healthy. People need to also take leadership positions and be encouraged to do so, similar to like what Bruce has done. That's just kind of like my 2 cents on the topic. So thank you, Bruce, for this opportunity. And I hope me being a part of the African Student Union that yields a big crowd, I hope to like partner and start certain conversations and bring them more to like the mainstream people, so then like everyone can mobilize and talk and start thinking about serious things as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Yaya. I really appreciate that. And also, I want to make a point to that as well. A big thing I learned with Professor Campbell's class, more interestingly enough, was that it takes a bunch of people. Like when I learned about MOSOP, right, which is Professor Campbell, he taught us about it. It was Mbongi people in Nigeria. And originally I was focused on just the leader of the movement, right? However, like in no way am I leader. This was done by African Initiative, by Daquan, BSU, and by Mazen at Columbia, right? So, and I wasn't just the only person writing, drafting all this, even though obviously Yaya knows me, so that's why he shouted me out. Thank you for that. It took a bunch of people, also professors here as well. So I think I want to say with that is like, within one person, there's always going to be people next to them or people in front of them. Even like in terms of, I would never been excited to do any of this. I don't think a lot of us would have been excited to do a lot of this without the professors. So, with Mazen, with Dr. Mixon Webster, or with Daquan, I know Dr. Liskey, or me, Dr. Professor Campbell. But that's what I had to say. But I know there's a few people with their hands raised. But Momodu, I've been making way for a while. So I'll go on to you. I know you had a great question. I want to hear what you want to say.
No, not at all. Thank you so much, Idris. Honestly, it's been a extremely generative conversation. I hope everyone can hear me. My name is Momodu. I'm currently pursuing my PhD in Black Studies at Cornell. And basically the stuff I've heard today has been extremely generative and extremely speaking to the project which I'm working on at the moment. So my question is, and I guess please feel any of the professors to answer this. In mapping out the current juncture in Black studies, I've trying to notice and pin down a few trends. And the kind of two camps I've noticed are what seems to be embodied praxis versus disembodied continued abstraction. So now the conceptual struggle is not over the material conditions of Black people, but rather we are fighting over who gets to define what Blackness is. So what I've come to notice is that while fighting over Blackness in the realm of the ontological, it finds its application in a culturalist turn. It finds application by way of culture. So my question, my long-winded question is, how do we avoid Black studies becoming a class project of the middle class?
I see Mazen, I see Mr. Brown. So I'm gonna start with Mazen, and then Mr. Brown, I'll go on to you. I see Professor Campbell already unmuted. He getting excited, but we going. That was a great question, Momo. You got everyone turned up. Mazen, if you want to start off with that.
Yeah. So I was actually going to ask a very similar question to that, because from my experience in Black studies in Colombia, it is very much, a lot of it is based on the ontological aspects of Blackness, and Blackness being like this abstract thing as opposed to studying Black people. And I guess one of the things that I was considering is, especially knowing the history of Colombia and what it's continuously doing to the neighboring Harlem community, and I know Syracuse University as well, what they're doing to the Black community with I-81. I'm not so sure about Stony Brook, but you know, how do we use like Black studies to within these institutions that harm our people? But yeah, that's just a follow-up based on what Mamadou was saying.
Okay, I'm gonna go up to Mr. Brown side. You can go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. I just want to be real quick. But one thing is that you have a generation of activists that kicked in the door, right? That created these possibilities. I would consider myself part of the generation that was taught by them, right? And that as time goes on, what happens is that the spaces that social movements open up end up also being absorbed in their own way. So we went from this discipline that had activism built into its whole way of being and doing. If you think about just the kinds of people that would even come and be able to at these institutions, artists, activists, etc., and then you look at what's happening now. So what happens now is that the space is open, and so you have opportunities for people who are really more pursuing professionalism. That is, you don't want a job in Black studies, you want a job at the illustrious Syracuse University. And it happens to be over here. That's what, and that is not an abnormal process. It's really the tension between social movements, bureaucracy, space, also the opportunism of a much older, more aggressive institution that we've created these cracks and spaces in. So what we have to do is anticipate that. And part of what this meeting is, I think, successful in doing is giving continuity to it so that we can think about, all right, we know these kinds of things are happening. We have this vision for it. How do we now anticipate others having an entirely different agenda? So even in the time since I've got my master's in Africana Studies till now, I got my master's in 1993 till now, I don't recognize many of the places that I've been because of this phenomenon. And this is a phenomenon that is something that's much more theoretical, that you can connect to social movements. Look at all of the optimism that people might have with an independence movement in a nation. Look at the vision, look at what we foresee, look at how it mobilizes us, and then look at the reality of governance, the reality of resources, the reality of imperialism. These are the kinds of things we have to navigate even in the local sphere with which we're operating in now. All right, I'm just saying that real short, and I know there's lots of folks that got things to say about that.
Professor Campbell, I see you applying over there. Would you like to jump in real quick and say something?
Well, yes, I think this is very rich, very, very rich. But I want to remind all of us here that the student activists were always in the minority. They're from the 1960s until now. But as a minority, they provided leadership. There are three kinds of students: those who just wanted to get along and to get their jobs, those who wanted their dignity, and those who had leadership. The ones who carried forward the leadership were the hard workers, the ones who were in the community and understood that even though they were in Colombia, that they could not distinguish Colombia from Harlem. If they were in Ithaca, they could not separate Ithaca from the prison system, from the poor Blacks. And if they were in Syracuse, they could not separate Syracuse from the Syracuse School District. So that minority is what we want to focus on. How you organize, strengthen yourself, and build networks to become stronger. The second part of the question is about abstraction. There's certain levels of abstraction that are presented to divert us from reality. The reality around us at the present moment is a crisis of imperialism. The crisis of imperialism brings about war. Imperialism, war, and fascism are all around us in the crisis of capitalism, and it affects global Africa in tremendous way. The first thing they try to do is to divide Africans between Africans from the continent, Africans from Latin America, the Caribbean, and North America. The challenge for us in dealing with abstraction is the abstraction should not carry us away and separate us from our community and from our brothers and sisters. These abstractions that are presented before us must be grounded in the historical reality of Black studies. Black studies have their own abstractions. And when we get into abstractions that are presented by postmodernism, Althusser, and those ideas that have very little relationship to the dignity of the African person, then we get carried away in our own minds. And so when we are in these institutions, whether Syracuse, Columbia, or Stony Brook, we should always ensure that our abstractions are linked to real human beings and real challenges of human beings.
Yeah, that was incredible, Professor Campbell. Thank you so much for that. I see Tanisha has her hand up. Would you like to ask a question or more in terms of the questions already asked?
No, just wanted to build off of some of the comments that are being made. Good evening, everyone. I'm Professor Tanisha Jackson in the Department of African American Studies as an assistant professor and the executive director of the Community Folk Arts Center. And I'm really excited about the question that's been presented, as well as hearing about the work before my, me being in this role, like the 13 demands that were, that I'm a beneficiary of, or the Community Folk Arts Center is a beneficiary of. But when I think about more about the abstraction of Blackness and really what Professor Campbell has said, I'm in strong agreement that there needs to be more emphasis on community engagement. I think that the Community Folk Arts Center is exemplary of that, so that the things become more pragmatic and people and students are able to apply, right, a praxis to what's being taught. It makes things more real, what we're reading about, and gets to the heart of what Black studies is, which one of the tenets emphasizes, right, community engagement. And so, I'm a proponent of that. The Community Folk Arts Center is an example of that through the arts. And I think that more activism that allows for those sort of models is what's needed, so that this is not just a theoretical or ontological discussion, but we can really see where what we're studying, right, has real impact for the community that we say, or communities that we say we care about and want to see change. So I just wanted to say that. And also a thank you to those who paved the way for the work that I currently do now at the Community Folk Arts Center.
Very well said, very well said. And I was at the Community Folk Arts Center yesterday for Alpha event, so that's very crazy that's the case. But I know Mahi had a question. I see her with her hand raised and Mahi wanted to say something.
Thank you, Idris, and thank you everyone for such an engaging conversation. So I guess since we're talking about this abstraction of reality, there's also an abstraction of the objectives and needs for Black students and Black people in general, I feel like. And so in line with that, I have kind of a two-part question for our speakers. I'm more concerned about how important was like self-organizing and self-articulating, and like what was the values of that process, right? Like, because we're also talking about, folks are talking about their environmental experiences affecting how they view and think about things, and how much does that guard from abstraction? And so that's the question for our speakers. But a question to students as well is like, how do you see Black student organizing in this era of diversity and inclusion, in this era of institutions setting up Black student organizations, and Black student organizations not necessarily being a self-organized initiative? Like the BSU on Syracuse campus, for example, was not a self-organized group, but it was set forth by the administration and so forth. So I guess for speakers and students, kind of differing questions, but with the same concept of how do we kind of guard ourselves from the abstraction of what we need as students, what we want as Black people?
I guess from the student angle, something one of my professors has been saying to me that's kind of been a recurring thought and a recurring idea. He constantly says to me, dispense of the canons, but keep the archives. And why I've been thinking about that, I continue to think about the canonization of certain texts in Black studies orients us in specific directions. And I believe that orientation is one of immobilization and one of depoliticization. So I guess in terms of organizing, we have to, I mean, again, I'm unavowedly a Marxist, yeah, and I'm very proud of that, yeah, Pan-African Marxist. And one of the things I first when I came into Cornell, one of the things I was quite perturbed by in Black studies was my cohort and many others in the department. There wasn't just a under-theorization of material conditions, there was an aversion to it. There was an aversion to it. It's almost like, oh, that thing failed, that white man's, that European thing failed ages ago. Why do you keep bringing it up? So again, so I'm at this juncture where I'm trying to think, okay, what is it about the way we do Black studies that is resulting in an immobilization? So I guess I haven't answered the question directly, but I do think something to do maybe the texts that have become canons. For example, when it's Fanon, most Black studies program will read Black Skin, White Masks, and maybe not towards African Revolution, for example. Texts like that, or they will ignore the materiality that Fanon underpins Blackness with for psychoanalysis, for example. So I'm just kind of thinking through these things aloud. I mean, again, I'm a year one PhD, so it's not for me to speak, but I just want to throw it out there anyway.
No, I just want to jump in real fast. Number one, like, no, you are speaking from a complete level of expertise that, you know, I don't think you should disregard. For example, that's number one, that's brilliant. Who did you said that again?
His name is Professor Siba Grovegi.
Okay. He said, dispel your canons, but keep the archive.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. And also I think to your question of, articulating the self, we all know that the real revolution already starts in the mind, right, of the individual. That's where the first revolution starts, right? You can't have that grand, revolutionary act without the individual coming to terms with its own circumstances, right, and compromises. So I think it's wholly, important, categorically necessary, right, that we are able to articulate not only our individual, our collective, but also our individual conditions, our individual situations, right, and be very, very accurate and real about them, and also our individual desires, right. That's how the dialogue communally, right, kind of starts to operate or starts to kind of move or get motorized, right. Also, that's how we influence, one another, how we also kind of help to expand each other's thinking, right? So we get beyond some of these myopic concerns that maybe only we have individually, right? So it's an interesting kind of paradox, right? The more we're able to better articulate what's going on with our individual circumstances, conditions, desires, needs, right? The better we, number one, understand our needs as an aggregate whole, right? So I think it's a very necessary question to ask, right? What role does self-articulation play, right, in group organizing? That's pretty much all I kind of had to say to that. I'm sure there's some great folks who can maybe add to that.
I would probably add to the discussion that when we talk about articulation and also how do we prevent becoming overly abstract, is that we be very intentional about who's at the table when we're having these discussions. You know, so there's not a bunch of academics, that we have working class people there who work every day, who grinding it out every day. We have single parent moms. We have young people. That's very important that it be intergenerational, because each one of these demographics brings a whole different understanding. And that's not to say that I'm against expertise, but it's to say that expertise manifests in different ways. So we have to be careful, because one thing's gonna happen, working class people are not gonna allow you to be there yapping about otherworldly entities. They're gonna bring you down to earth. They're gonna talk about, okay, how do you deal with food, clothing, shelter, love, peace, happiness, safety from cops killing us with impunity? How do we deal with that? Mass incarceration, labor exploitation, right? They're gonna bring you to earth. So we have to always include the working class, college students, the youth, and the elders. I think that's a key part of it.
And as a little bit of a, I would say, a person who can learn a lot more, does anyone here have any references to, like, whether it be movements to groups that you guys think did a great job mobilizing? I mean, I always have been introduced to a few, but, you know, if you guys have any, and this can be in different types of ranges as well, I would love to hear some of, like, what you draw the most inspiration from, what you guys think, like, really got a lot of, it doesn't have to be they necessarily got work done, but what do you guys think is the most inspirational movements or groups that really mobilize for what they believed in? So I would like to hear something about that as well.
Well, I would want to recommend to students, especially those at Syracuse, that one of the first things you must do is know your reality. When there was something called Not Again SU, I remember walking in a march, and I tried to bring to the attention of the students that every building that you pass in Syracuse University has a history to do with either the First Nation peoples or the African Americans. And when I passed the Science Tech building, I think what my brother Timba has said about the organizing and the 13-point program, most students from Syracuse University who is on this discussion do not know about the 13-point program. They do not know of the struggles that went on within the university to set up the professorships, the community folk art gallery, the library. So when the administration gets to students to say, we want you to start a BSU, they want you to erase the history of what happened in 1989. That's why I'm so happy that my brother is on this call. He's got a book about this. So you don't have to go very far. You can have archival information in Syracuse. My brother from Cornell says, go to the archives. The archives are right here in Syracuse. And one of the things, what we know about Black student organizing, you cannot separate student organizing from soccer, from football, from sports, from track and field. They're organizing in the 1960s. The brothers and sisters in California were organizing just as Colin Kaepernick. So our brothers and sisters who are involved in sports, they try to cut them off from other Black students. So yes, we need to ensure that this kind of activity that we have in meeting together, we have concrete outcomes. So you turn your study into studying. Well, when I walk around Syracuse University and I walk past that mural next to the Hall of Languages, what does that mean in the anti-fascist struggle? Many students walk past these buildings and they have no idea. So I would say study your surroundings as a prelude to study what is going on in your community where you live at the present moment. And there's so much going on in Columbia, in Harlem, and in Stony Brook that we have enough work for us to do, that we can get so many PhDs and master students out of what's going on in our communities right around us. I see Scott wanted to say something.
I was going to say, I concur 100%. I think this is a problem that is not really, I'm certainly sure that Professor Campbell didn't mean this, but this is everywhere. This is every single campus that I've been to. That separation between those who have kicked in the door and opened the spaces and the knowledge transfer. There's a problem at UCLA, there's a problem at Cornell. These are problems everywhere. So I just wanted to add to that, to see this as something that we can even create solidarities around. That is to say, when we ask our questions about our environment, and then we're in dialogue with people in other places, we can have a discussion about the two and really hold each other accountable in that regard when we interface with each other. So that's all I wanted to say, is that this is really a shared problem and part of the generational gap that was actually forged by enemies of Black freedom that were invested in that separation, and that the dividend, the payoff of that separation are these kinds of problems. And the intervention that we're opposing is the event like this.
And I see Mazen has his hand up. Would you like to say something, Mazen?
Yeah. I just had a question. So a lot of Black student orgs on campus, they try to host a lot of events, and a lot of them are to gain a lot of traction and popularity when it comes to more like party spaces or more fun activities and things to really get people to attend their events. But there's a lack of like political action and activity, and a lot of the problem with that is many people might not be interested in that. And so for the professors here, how do we, make it so that people become more interested in taking part in political action, and we could also incorporate a way that doesn't completely eliminate the enjoyment of these Black student orgs, but to also involve that. And another thing is that there are also some organizations off of campus that do more political work. So do we need to separate ourselves from these institutions to, take this political action necessary? So these are a few questions that I had in mind.
Well, if I could say one thing is about getting together, is that try to find that sweet spot where you meet people where they are and they meet you where you are. So, sometimes really we're at a stage now in many of these situations, just congregation alone is difficult and has political value. So, folks can get together to go to a huge sports event. They can get together to go to a huge big name artist. They had this Syracuse, the state fair. People can get together for that without a problem. But congregating as students, while we have the demands of working, while we have all this stress on us, there has to be a give and take. So I think a lot of it is just finding ways that we can get together in an environment that is not hostile, or we can even dialogue. We can have events there, but I think it can grow organically. But from what I have seen, and I'm coming from a different experience, we're struggling with the basic. We're struggling with, we have a African diaspora floor, but there's no real, people live there, but there's no real getting together, if you know what I mean. So sometimes you have to break the ice with some things that may not seem very radical at first, but I think that's kind of what did Nkrumah say, go to the people, start with what they have, build on what they know, and I think that's wherever that sweet spot is, whether it be, I don't know, Black karaoke night or whatever it is that can just get folks there, that's where we start, I think. That's just my sense of it, but somebody else is gonna have another perspective.
If I may, I want you to use the experience of Syracuse University, because we have a specific problem where 15 years ago, we had 13% of the student body was Black students. Now it's down to 3% of the student body. There has been a deliberate attempt to reduce the number of Black students. That's number one. Number two, there's a division going on the campus about something called ADUS, African Descendants of Slavery. ADUS is a job by conservative forces to divide African-American students from African students, from African Caribbean students, and Latin American students. And so there is less appreciation for global Africa. Thirdly, there is the administration advised students not to take courses in African American studies and in Black studies because they cannot help them professionally. And our student leaders have to be aware of these divisive tactics. What I can say, I would agree with you, Scott, wherever we have opportunities, students need to get together and use those opportunities to educate each other. For example, in 2010, the African students created the Pan-African World Cup. So then the students went into the gym and they had their own World Cup competition, and they asked the Italian students, they asked the Greek students, they asked the German students, and African students created a team to play against them. So they created a space out of the World Cup to educate Africans about Pan-Africanism. Similarly, one of the most popular things on Syracuse University campus is the fashion show of the African Students Union. For me, there's nothing wrong with the fashion show, but the fashion show should not cut us off from those who produce the fabric, those who do the work to plant the cotton and the work that went into this. And we can use the fashion show as a means of educating people, not just fashion where you can show you can have expensive clothes. So this networking among students needs to go on so we have some sense that we are part of global Africa, and our grandparents may come from Germany or come from Nigeria or come from Haiti, but we are all suffering from white supremacy, and we should all organize in our communities for the benefit of Black people.
Great. And I'm gonna get on Fabrice, but I do want to say also, if you guys haven't seen the chat yet, Daquan did put a group meet. Feel free to join that group meet. It's just gonna be a continuation of this discussion. But I'm gonna go on Fabrice. He was raising his hand, so go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. This is a wonderful event. Thank you, Bruce, for inviting me. Thank you to all the speakers here. I've been learning a lot. But I want to address Mazen's question in regards to shifting the narrative of organizations. So I'm currently part of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and I'm also currently part of the Haitian American Student Association. And being part of those two orgs, I think the most important way to really have serious conversations on the things that impact us as a community is through the leadership of these orgs, right? So I would like to give a couple of examples, right? So during my freshman and sophomore years, there's certain orgs, right, that were led by different groups of people that had intentions on certain conversation regarding to unity and learning about each other's history, right? And we would have events where, you know, people will come together and learn about different cultures and histories, right? And those events tended to be successful, right? But now when you do have a change of leadership, and that change of leadership don't believe in them and those same values and principles, you know, things starts to change, right? So certain conversations I used to be held in the past start to diminish. And that's something that I've been seeing a lot as being part of these orgs, right? Some organizations tend to not want to have certain conversations because they don't really find it of interest to them, right? So I think in regards to even tackling that problem, we must really identify
as an organization. What do we really stand for? What are our principles? And to make sure those principles are being added on into each event that we do moving forward.
That was great, Fabrice. And I'm gonna go to Daquan. I see him with his hand raised.
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to add on to Dr. Campbell and Mazen, I feel like for Stony Brook University, and I'm pretty sure it's prevalent with on each campus, is diaspora wars and the tension between those of people who refer themselves as being from the Caribbean or from Africa or being considered Black American or African American. I feel like this fragmentation is preventing, a lot of these orgs from, collaborating amongst one another to actually go for an actual cause, and target some of these issues or, just activism in general. And I feel like this is a huge hindrance to, like, since I'm going on the topic of mobilization, I feel like there will be some tension between, those of different from different parts of the diaspora. And I really want to know, like, what is the best way to unify, people of all African descent, and regardless of what part of the African diaspora you come from, so that we could work towards and cause and really target the major issues of like white supremacy or whatnot, instead of just creating events for socializing, which is also dope, but at the end of the day, your organization and their objective is activism. Why you simply going for socializing? That's just me. But yeah, I just want to pose this question to everyone to respond to.
Can I say something? Can I, Idris?
Yeah, go ahead, Professor Campbell.
I want to use a current example. The United States government has been, for the past 6 months, mobilizing actively to bring military forces into Haiti and to get Black people from the Caribbean, from other Caribbean countries, CARICOM, and from Africa to support the United States military supporting the oppression of the people of Haiti. Now, this is a very urgent question. The Global Pan-African Movement had a meeting on the question of Haiti, and it's alarming the level of killings that has been stimulated to try to occupy Haiti. I would say that before our very eyes, we have these questions before us. And if we hold a meeting in Columbia or Stony Brook, and there are only 2 or 3 students who turn up, we should have it. Because we should never allow the situation in Haiti to develop where our brothers and sisters from Haiti believe that their resistance to imperialism is their struggle. So yes, we may not have a lot of people coming to the meeting, but in Columbia, in Stony Brook and Syracuse, I'm hoping that these questions before us about the military in Haiti, about one thing that should unite all of us is police violence against young Black people, incarceration of Black people. There's so many things that unite us instead of dividing us. And let us focus on the ones that unite us, and let us be excellent and study hard and work hard and organizing hard.
And Mamadou, you have a question to ask? Or is it a reply?
I do, but I know I've asked so much, so please let people go before me.
Okay, no, I just want to make sure people make the points to the problem. But yeah, for sure. Thank you. Quajo, I see that you have your hand up. You can go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Hello, my name is Quajo. So on the question about how we can unite like across the diaspora, I feel like we have to first really sit down and put aside petty things such as like like what I've really witnessed a lot, for a lot of quote unquote immigrant children, like that people that were born here though, who are sons and daughters of like immigrant parents, like I've talked to a lot of them as I've been in college, and I've seen that a lot of them feel like outside, they feel outcasted by their own, like their mothers and fathers people. They feel like they don't fit and they're not accepted there. And like I feel like that type of thing. And then the people who consider themselves the true like whatever you want to call it, the true Africans or whatever, that they're not helping the case by outcasting others. So I feel like that's one thing that we have to really put aside, because it's all that matters, like what's in your blood. What's in your blood is what makes you you. I feel like for the most part, at least physically, and I feel like people have to put aside those petty cultural differences where it's like, oh, you didn't grow up there, so you're not Jamaican, or you didn't grow up there, so you're not this and that. We have to really sit down, and really like put those type of things aside. I feel like it's very important, like because that's just active division. Someone who doesn't feel accepted in their like by their people, by their ancestors' people, then it's like they're not gonna feel as devoted and loyal to it. So that's why we have to accept people with open arms. And I feel like over the years we've really done that. We have to appreciate that. Like even when I was in middle school, like I feel like a lot of the young Africans in here, or a lot of the young Africans in here, we all can like what's the word? We all can attest to how difficult it was being African in middle school, and even sometimes I think even in high school, or how difficult it was when people found out you were African, and your own African American, our own African American brothers and sisters, like they treated us really bad, like they insulted us and a lot of try to degrade us just because we were from Africa, and it's not their fault. I wouldn't really blame them because it just comes from a place of ignorance and like what they perceive Africa as because of the media and what their parents tell them and all that. So it's just I think we've come a very long way. Like Black people have been united like way more than we have in the past, especially between the African that like just across the African diaspora, especially in the United States. So I feel like we should continue to just put aside petty things and really just focus on really being together. Have meetings like these where it's like, and then like I feel like the orgs, like a lot of the orgs, they should not just have social meetings, but really have serious meetings as well about like Africa and the African diaspora, that diaspora itself, like things like the African Student Union, BSU, all that. We should all really like come together, all that petty stuff. Even I still notice there's a lot of petty things separating a lot of these orgs still. There's a lot of like we have to really just come together and really ally each other and make events that we all ally instead of keep like these petty things continue to like thrive and cutting us apart, all of our orgs apart. So I thought that was just important to point out there.
Thank you so much, Kwejo, and I really appreciate that. Hamra, I see you. You have your hand up. We can go on to you.
Hello, my name is Hamada Debebe. I am with Syracuse, part of the African Initiative. I wanted to talk about 2 points that Professor Campbell made that I agree with and one that I kind of disagree with, if that's okay. One is his highlight that orgs on campus are doing very little to mobilize each other within the campus, and I completely agree with that. I honestly believe that Black orgs on campus are a joke, to put it lightly, if I'm being honest. From BSU to ASU to Greek life of all things is one that I feel like is such a detriment to us within Syracuse, but that's another conversation, I honestly believe. I feel like instead these orgs and these clubs have done more to feed into classist, anti-Black rhetoric more than they have actually united us on campus. So I completely agree with that and see what he's motioning to within Syracuse. But as for the point that I disagree with that he said is on the ADOS comment that he made, I have actually been trying to keep up with African descents of slavery. I first came into contact with it on Twitter. Honestly, I actually did not even know that there was a conversation being had on campus. I'm glad that it's made it to offline. But what I wanted to disagree with is that ADOS has not, in my opinion, has worked to divide African Americans, or as some ADOS want to be called, they want to be called Black Americans rather than African Americans. though I see how that is the divide that Professor Campbell is speaking about, I feel like this has been more of a movement for African Americans to recognize themselves within diaspora, in my eyes, rather than putting down these diasporic groups that rise up and say we want to exist solely or be recognized. We should be asking why. And by grouping all Black people together within that diaspora, even though we are, one people, kumbaya, we are coming from, the same motherland, I feel like by grouping us all together, that would be using the language that our oppressors have given us and removing the identity that Black people have. Because especially within the ADOS community that I've seen is that they have made real works in order for example, reparations. That is one of their main goals that they have been moving for. And it's something that is like at the core of this movement, of ADOS movement. So that's the one thing that I want to disagree about in saying that ADOS, I think it's more of highlighting that African Americans feel at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to conversations within Pan-Africanism, when it comes to conversations about, us within the African Initiative. We all like to group ourselves together, but that is not how it works, especially if we live in America. Even me as, an immigrant, an African who migrated from there, I realized that I have some privileges that African Americans do not have. And I feel like that's what ADOS is trying to highlight. At least that's what I understood from it. And I just wanted to put my 2 cents in about that.
I see a few hands that went up. We can start off with Quay. I know Professor Campbell too wants to talk. I mean, not Quajo, Momodou. I know Momodou wanted to say something as well. Professor Campbell, we'll save you after the students speak, but we'll let Momodou go on with that. You said a lot of stuff, so I know that's a lot to unpack right there.
Yeah, I mean, my question was about something else, but I would like to respond. First and foremost, I think it's important to follow the funding of ADOS. Particularly, the funding of ADOS actually comes from right-wing organizations, and that's just a fact that's online. That's right. That's the first thing I like to say. And secondly, the person who started ADOS has very close links to the Trump organization whilst in office. So I think that's a very important notice. Second of all, you mentioned the point about immigration. Me up too, I'm a Black immigrant from a particular class status from Africa via the UK to America. So whilst I recognize the specificity that exists amongst African Americans, what you see after third, fourth generation is class plays a massive role here. And this is what when we have a class analysis of Black folk, you realize, I'll give you a famous example, same issues in the UK where I know the UK context better. We have an example of, Black Caribbean boys tend to fare much worse than African boys. And there's a whole dynamic between, we have to do things for Black only, Caribbean boys only, and, leave African boys alone because they're doing better. But what you find after 3 generations in, they're almost indistinguishable. You can no longer distinguish between Black African boys and Caribbean boys once they go through the system in the UK. So I think that's where class plays a role, and also socialization that plays a role in these countries. So, and I often ask as well, when I speak to my ADOS brothers, I know people in ADOS, I often speak to them, okay, how do you define an American descendant of slavery? I say African American. Well, I say, okay, fine. My roommate right now, the quick story, my roommate is from Trinidad and Tobago. His grandmother was on a ship from Gambia heading to America, but got shipwrecked and she swam to the Caribbean. Would he be a part of African Americans, for example? How do you define who's African American this way? Because the transatlantic slavery is so messy in and of itself. I'm just a bit confused. Who's going to get reparations and how do you decide that? Yes, that is a specificity with African American. And there's real prejudice that exists amongst every community has prejudice. But again, I think as activists, as organizers, our role should be taking a positive stance and uniting people as opposed to feeding into certain reactionary tendencies amongst us. That wasn't my question, but I want to respond to that. I have a question afterwards as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, I felt like you wanted to respond to that. Humber, I'll give you a second to respond. I want to hear what Quajo. I will go to Quajo, then Humber, then Fabrice, and then Professor Campbell, if that's fine with you guys.
I completely understand and know the history of the development or the creation of ADOS. I not know the creator, but like I've know about them, know what they've done, or what the root of how the organization came to be, how the movement came to be, basically. However, your last point about trying to create a positive and, group together, it just does not work, because in my eyes, that is erasure, if that makes sense. Trying to group everyone together and say, we've all gone through pain, we've all, been oppressed by the white man or whatever, that does nothing to create tangible change for specific people who have been hurt in specific ways, if that makes sense. And within the ADOS community, I feel like they have a specific target that they want to talk about. And you can differentiate who is within the Atlantic slave trade. They are talking about those who made it, not to the Caribbeans, but those who made it to this land within America and who have tangible history of being descendants of slaves within the country. And while I understand the socioeconomic stance of that, there is still a difference when it comes to race and the racializations that African Americans go through specifically. So that is the one thing that I really disagree with in Pan-Africanism, where it's all just, we've all gone through pain, so we should all just band together and go against, this one target goal that we have. And I completely understand that, of course. But if we are not separating these things we are being oppressed and being targeted at, what is the end goal? What are we reaching for? What things are we talking about? And that's always the question that is left unanswered for me, because it's always just, we're being, oppressed and we're going through stuff. But I'm like, we can be specific, and that's okay to be specific and saying that, Ethiopians go through this thing, Nigerians go through this thing, African Americans go through this thing. And the bygone is that we are being oppressed. But I think there's just, specificity is okay in my eyes, if that makes sense.
All right, great. And then we'll go to Quajo, then to Fabrice.
Okay, yeah. So I actually did not notice my hand was up. I can also add to the conversation. So basically, I was trying to. I forgot her name again. What's her name? Sorry, the one before me. What was her name? Huh?
Kamara.
Hamare. Did I say it right? Hamare.
Wait.
Okay. Yeah. So definitely, I agree. Like with your point about maybe we should be more specific with like what we're getting oppressed. But I feel like we have those. Like I feel like there's been a lot of we've as Black people over the years have really we've been specific about what we've been oppressed about for a lot of times. But our goals and what we're trying to reach, I feel like okay, that's where we struggle with what's our overall what are we trying? What's our overall goals? What are we trying to reach as a result? So I feel like for one, we should be trying to lift ourselves financially. That's one thing, and there's a matter of we shouldn't. There comes a time we should take some not form of accountability, not just blame the white man. We have some power. I feel like now we have some strength of our own. We don't have to keep begging the white man for everything. We can't just keep begging the government. We have the power on our own now to do some stuff for ourselves and to really hold each other accountable for certain things that people in our community do, instead of supporting toxicity in our environment or supporting things that aren't beneficial for us. So I feel like that one of the main goals for us, for Black people, just as African diaspora, especially back in Africa, really lifting ourselves up financially. Because money is power at the end of the day. So that should be one of our main goals if we want to be specific. And how we're going to do that is a lot of things I feel like that goes into it. But I feel like that should be one of our main goals as people.
Okay, great, Quajo. And just because time is short, I'm gonna go through everyone, but try to make your responses a little bit shorter. So we'll go to Fabrice, then to Mahi, then to Mr. Tahima.
Hello. Once again, my name is Fabrice. I would like to address one of the points that you made. Correct me if I pronounce it wrong. Hamare. Right. Okay. So you mentioned your first point. I'm not gonna say word for word because I'm gonna paraphrase it in regards to some of the undergrad organizations being a joke. So I've been a part of, or I've attended a lot of African Initiative events, right, for a long period of time. And I've always found inspiration in the things that this organization talks about, and even the people that it brings, right? And I think for undergrad organizations, right, we don't really see those conversations on a higher intellectual level, right? So when I go to these African Initiative events, these are some of the times that I'm actually seeing conversations, that large scale conversations that affect us in a high intellectual matter. So with that being said, when BSU or ASU or HASA even have these events, right, we don't really end. Well, I must also say that this is also a grad organization, right? So undergrad and grad, we don't really see each other as much at all, right? And so for undergrad organizations, right, we don't really have that type of leadership, not leadership, but support from grad organizations, right, in terms of talking about, this is what actually should be talked about, right? We don't get that type of support. We don't see that at all, right? I know I've invited Africa Initiative to one event that we wanted to have, and the communication was weak, right? I didn't really hear too much back in terms of, because I really want to bridge Africa Initiative with, undergrad organizations, because I think it's really important, right? We as Black students, especially going to PWI, we don't see conversations, very intellectual conversations taking place, right? So, you being part of Africa Initiative, or everybody that is part of Africa Initiative, I think it's one initiative that that you all should take is also supporting undergrad organizations, right? Rather than seeing them crumble or or not have or host intellectual things that is pertinent to our communities. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabrice. Mr. Tiemba, I know you want to say something.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. I wanted to say, from listening to a lot of what you all have contributed tonight, I guess I put in the form of some things to think about. There's two quick suggestions that might help. And that is, I know that political movements, organizations in them, the ones that are the most effective and that tend to have a sense of continuity, tend to have a strong political educational component, so that all of the members are on the same ideological page. Even though they may have minor disagreements on things, they have a general understanding of what's what, who's who. So I think a fun way to do that might be to consider having debates. So you can have, for instance, a person that represents ADOS, that's a student, and a person who says, no, that's not good, and you have a structured debate. Now, the goal here is not to be sensational or entertaining. The goal is to really try to help the people in the audience to have a better grasp of both positions, so they come away with a clearer understanding politically, or even come away with practical, tangible ways to take this ideology and operationalize it. That's one thing. The other thing is they had study groups. The study groups help organizations to bond. It helps them to get rid of any political illusions, and it helps them to get on one page. So those are things I think that would help. And it would also help people to appreciate the fact that there's going to be diversity in our movement. But diversity and inclusion does not mean that we have clowns and incompetence and people who are mischief makers in our group. It just means that we allow for a difference of perspective within certain parameters. I think that's important to build that type of capability. It makes an organization stronger when they can say, well, we look at this different, but we respect each other's position, and we can move together around that, but it can't be, we can't just take everybody in. There has to be parameters and some type of realistic boundaries, because some people don't mean you well, right? So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much. And Professor Campbell, I'll let you finish up the discussion before I make closing remarks. So you can go ahead.
Nobody else wants to speak?
I don't think no one else has their hand raised, but I'll let you make the.
Okay, I thought my brother from Detroit wanted to say something. Jonah, I thought he wanted to say something. No? Okay. Okay.
No, I was just amening, brother Tahimba.
Okay. No, I want to thank the organizers for this wonderful occasion, because there's nothing better than for us to come together, congregate, and to speak, because we all grow from this and we all get better. Mary is one of our strong leaders that are she's coming up, and I think what Brother Tahimba said, that we should have open debates. We should have quite clear debate without acrimony about these things. And what our brother in Cornell said, that we should bear in mind that this organization was started by people close to Trump. And the fact is, what would we do with Malcolm X? Where would we put Malcolm X? Malcolm X, would he be a member of ADUS? Malcolm X could never become a member of ADUS. Malcolm X's father was killed by the Klan. Malcolm's mother lived for 20, 30 years after he was killed and assassinated. Malcolm X's mother was a Garveyite from Grenada in the Caribbean. So many of our leaders, Malcolm X, Kwame Ture, Shirley Chisholm. And so what we need to talk about are issues, and reparations is an issue that we should educate ourselves about. And reparations is not all about money. Let's take the Flint, Michigan question. How do we repair the water situation in Flint, Michigan? The ADUS cannot discuss Flint, Michigan, because Flint, Michigan means that people in Dearborn get clean water and people in Flint get dirty water. That's a reparations question. And whether you're from the Caribbean, from Africa, or African Americans, you want clean water. That's the same thing that's going on in Mississippi. That's the same thing going on in Houston. And so what we have to understand is the objectives of our organization is the humanity of African descendant persons, and it's not about money. We will use reparations as a school to educate us. But the point I want to underline, what Tahimba said, organize, have study groups, and when you organize and you're in a study group, you'll get better grades, because the people you're working with, studying with, they will help you with your papers. They will help you to study together. So you are actually, I want to use a word that is used, you're in the vanguard of this generation that is coming out of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. Do not allow them to cut you off from the community, either in Flint or in Columbia or in Stony Brook or Syracuse. You get together, and I'm so happy to have been here with all of you, and thank you very much for the organizers for doing this.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Campbell, for that. And I really want to thank everyone for coming. Like, just in itself, you know, we hit 50 people at a certain point. I know a lot of people left for overtime by 8 minutes, but just seeing everyone come, seeing everyone contribute to the conversation and learning from everyone, like that really gives me hope for the future of Black liberation and Black mobilization itself. And I think this event itself is a step to Black mobilization. So I really want to thank everyone for coming, and join the group me, please. Make sure, you know, you guys are involved in your orgs on campus too, whether it be Columbia, Stony Brook, Syracuse, or I know there's people from Cornell and other schools. But again, thank you, and you guys have a great day. So, see you guys. Thank you.